The crew of a high-tech research vessel just found the wreckage of the USS Hornet, a World War II aircraft carrier sunk by the Japanese back in 1942.
At over 3 miles down in the South Pacific, a drone just panned its lights across the USS Hornet, and the images are absolutely terrifying. This aircraft carrier saw the most intense fighting of World War II before being sent to the bottom. Yet it remains completely intact. There are no signs of the usual decay you see on ships like the Titanic.
It's a really strange signature.
Look at that. Oh yeah. Oh wow.
Instead, the team found personal items and military gear that look like they were placed there yesterday. This is not just luck. It is a glitch in the way we understand the deep sea and its hidden mysteries. 3 miles down. The team had to enter the midnight zone to find out. To get the science out of the way, so you understand why this discovery is freaking people out, the USS Hornet is resting at approximately 17,500 feet. That is over 3 miles down. To put that in perspective, if you took the highest point of the Rocky Mountains and flipped it upside down into the ocean, you still would not touch the deck of this ship. At this depth, the environment is alien. There is zero sunlight. The temperature is near freezing. Basically, if someone were to step outside a submarine at that depth, they would not just drown, they would be imploded instantly. So, here is the deal. When ships sink, they usually break apart. The air pockets inside them burst violently as they go down. The hull is supposed to twist and snap under the strain. But the Hornet looks like she gently floated down and parked. This is where the wild theories start to get popular online. You have people on forums claiming the ship entered a pressure vacuum. Some say it is evidence of strange technology that made the steel immune to physics. Some even suggest that the ship is not actually there, and what we are seeing is a projection. Yeah, about that. While those theories sound cool, the reality is actually more interesting. The reason the Hornet looks so spooky is likely because she was so damaged when she sank. She was full of holes. This meant she filled with water quickly, making the pressure inside and outside the same before she hit the crushing depths. She did not implode because she was already filled with the ocean, but that does not explain the preservation. Why is she not covered in rust like other famous ships? The Titanic is being eaten by a bacteria that is literally munching the metal away. But at 17,000 feet in the Pacific, the water is different. It is oxygen-starved. It is cold. It is a desert. There is very little life down there to eat the ship. The Hornet has entered a state of deep freeze, but even knowing the science, seeing it is a different ballgame. When the drone cameras first panned over the flight deck, the operators stopped breathing for a second. It was not just metal, it was the stillness. It felt like walking into a tomb that had been sealed for 1,000 years. The ship was perfectly still, but as the drone moved closer to the bridge, the sensors picked up something that made the researchers very nervous. Finding the Hornet was not just hard, it was statistically impossible. This mission was led by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. He had a passion for naval history and the money to fund the most advanced private navy in the world. His ship, the RV Petrel, is a 250-foot beast loaded with technology that makes standard gear look old. But even with billions of dollars of tech, you need to know where to look. And the Pacific Ocean is a nightmare for searchers. The problem with naval battles is that they are chaotic. In 1942, there was no GPS. Navigators used the stars and basic math. When a ship is sinking and people are struggling and fires are burning, nobody is writing down the exact coordinates. The researchers had to look at the logs of the ships that tried to save the Hornet. They also looked at the logs of the Japanese ships that finished her off. And get this, the coordinates did not match. They were off by miles. So, the team created a probability box. This is a square on the map where the ship might be. They sent down the yellow, torpedo drone that thinks for itself. It swims in a pattern like a lawnmower, scanning the mud. For days, the screen showed nothing but flat, gray mud. This is the abyssal plain, the most boring place on Earth. But then there was a glitch. The sonar showed a hard, sharp object in a world of soft mud. It was not a rock. Nature does not do right angles. The mood on the search ship shifted to high alert. They brought the drone up and prepared the robot with the cameras. The descent took hours. As the robot hit the bottom, the darkness was total. Then the pilot flipped on the bright lights. A wall of steel appeared. It was the hull of a carrier. But here is the crazy part. Usually, you have to spend weeks identifying a wreck. Not this time. The robot flew up to the back of the ship, wiped away some dirt, and there it was. A faded gray number 8. CV-8. The USS Hornet. It was almost too easy once they found it. It was like the ship wanted to be found. But as they moved to the flight deck, the vibe changed. The deck was covered in things that looked brand new. One specific vehicle, parked near the edge, started a massive debate about how it got there. Science of the deep. This is the part that breaks your brain. The drone glided over the flight deck, and the first thing that popped out was the bright yellow paint of a tractor. Now think about what this machine has been through. It was on the deck of a burning ship. It sat there while the ship tilted at 45 degrees. It rode the ship down 3 miles, crashing into the bottom. It has been soaking in salt water for 77 years. It should be a pile of rust dust. Instead, the tires are still black. The paint is still yellow. You can read the gauges. The logo is crisp. How is this possible? This brings us back to the wild theories. There is a rumor online that the metal used in the 1940s was different, that it was pre-atomic steel. While that is true, it does not make it immune to decay. The real reason the tractor looks so good is the paint. That industrial lead-based paint they used back then is incredibly tough. It basically formed a seal around the metal, protecting it from the seawater. Plus, the rubber tires are made of high-quality material that takes centuries to break down in the cold dark. But the tractor was not the only thing. The drone found a fighter plane. The wings were folded back. The glass over the pilot was closed. But look closely at the footage. The gun ports are taped over. That tape is still there. A piece of fabric tape has survived 77 years at 17,000 feet. That is mind-blowing. But the most haunting items are the ones that belong to the people. Inside the bridge, the drone found a bag. It was open. Inside, you could see a shaving kit, a toothbrush, a mirror, and get this, hanging on a hook nearby was a towel. A towel in the ocean for 77 years. It had not fallen apart. It had not floated away. It was just hanging there. This has led to some speculation that the water inside the ship is not moving at all. It is a dead zone where time literally stops. Seeing that towel hit the crew hard. A sailor used that. Maybe he washed his face just hours before the attack. He left it there, ran to his post, and never came back. It turns the Hornet from a cool shipwreck into a scene of a great tragedy. It forces you to remember that this is a grave. But to understand why these men were fighting so hard and why they stayed with this ship, we have to look at the mission that put a target on the Hornet. The ship was marked for trouble the moment she launched a specific set of planes that were never designed to fly from a ship. Flying the impossible. Let us go back to 1942. The US was not doing well in the war. A lot had been lost. America needed a win. Enter the Hornet. The plan they came up with was totally insane. They wanted to take massive bombers used by the Army and fly them off a carrier. This is like trying to drive a huge truck off a diving board. A bomber needs about 2,000 feet of runway to take off. The Hornet deck only had about 460 feet. On paper, it should not work, but they did not care about the math. They wanted to send a message. They stripped the planes down. They took out the radios and the heavy guns. They even took out the secret bombing tools because they were afraid the planes would crash and the technology would be stolen. They replaced them with cheap pieces of metal. On April 18, 1942, the weather was terrible. The waves were crashing over the front of the Hornet. The ship was moving up and down like a roller coaster. And then the alarm sounded. They had been spotted by a Japanese boat. They were over 600 miles from their target, much further than they planned. They had to launch now or the whole fleet might be sunk. The first bomber revved its engines. The noise was incredible. The pilot held the brakes until the engines were screaming. Then he let go. The plane moved slowly down the deck. It looked too slow. It looked like it was going to drop right into the waves. But here is the trick. The captain of the Hornet steered the ship directly into the strong wind. The speed of the ship plus the speed of the wind gave the wings just enough lift. The plane dipped, almost touched the water, and then climbed into the sky. One by one, 16 bombers took off. The Japanese were shocked. They did not believe American planes could reach them. When the bombs started falling, panic set in. The damage was not huge, but the message was clear. We can reach you. The Hornet became a hero ship overnight, but that fame came with a price. By embarrassing the enemy military, the Hornet became the #1 target. The order was given to find that ship and sink at it no matter what. And they meant it. The Hornet survived that raid, but her next battle would be much worse. Most people talk about big battles as a masterclass in strategy, but for the Hornet, the next big fight was a total mess. A warrior's end. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, the flight deck of the USS Hornet was a chaotic symphony of roaring engines and the smell of high-octane aviation fuel. The air was thick with the humid salt spray of the Central Pacific, and the stakes could not have been higher. This was the Battle of Midway, the turning point of the war, though nobody on board knew it yet. The Hornet launched her planes into a clear blue sky, sending her pilots out to find the Imperial Japanese Navy. But in the fog of war, even the best-laid plans can disintegrate. A critical command decision, later debated by historians for decades, sent the Hornet's strike group on a path toward empty ocean. The commander guessed the enemy was heading one way, but the Japanese carriers had changed course. As the fuel gauges on the American planes began to drop toward empty, most of the Hornet's air wing found nothing but blue water. Many pilots were forced to ditch in the sea or scramble back to the carrier, their mission a frustrating failure. However, one group of men refused to follow the incorrect coordinates. Torpedo Squadron 8, led by Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron, had a hunch. Waldron was a man of iron will who broke radio silence to tell his superiors he was heading where he believed the enemy actually was. He led 15 Douglas TBD Devastators, slow, lumbering torpedo bombers that were already considered obsolete, away from the main group and into history. They found the Japanese fleet, but they found it alone. There were no American fighters to protect them from the deadly Japanese Zeros, and no dive bombers to distract the anti-aircraft gunners below. Waldron's voice crackled over the radio, telling his men that even if only one plane remained, they had to press the attack. They flew low and slow across the waves, sitting ducks for the Japanese fleet. One by one, the Devastators were swatted out of the sky. Of the 30 men in Torpedo 8, 29 were eliminated. 15 planes went in, and 0 came back. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Only one pilot, Ensign George Gay, survived. He crashed into the sea, hid under a seat cushion to avoid being shot by Japanese strafers, and watched from the water as the world burned around him. From a purely tactical perspective, Torpedo 8's attack was a disaster. They didn't score a single hit. But history is rarely that simple. Because Waldron's group attacked at sea level, The Japanese Combat Air Patrol, the fighter planes protecting the carriers, had to dive down to the surface of the water to intercept them. The Japanese gunners and pilots were focused entirely on the slaughter happening at the waves. At that exact moment, American SBD Dauntless dive bombers from the Enterprise and Yorktown arrived high overhead. They looked down and saw the Japanese carriers completely undefended, their decks cluttered with fuel lines and rearming bombs. In 5 frantic minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were turned into infernos. The sacrifice of the Hornet's torpedo squadron had cleared the way for the victory that changed the course of World War II. But the Hornet did not get to celebrate her survival for long. The war in the Pacific was becoming a brutal war of attrition, and the U.S. Navy was losing ships faster than it could replace them. By the autumn of 1942, the carrier strength of the United States was decimated. The Lexington had been sunk at Coral Sea. The Yorktown was lost at Midway. The Wasp had been sent to the bottom by a submarine. Suddenly, the Hornet was the only operational U.S. carrier left in the South Pacific. The crew began to call this period the Lonely Ocean. They were the thin gray line holding back the Japanese advance toward Australia. The men on board lived with a constant, gnawing tension. They knew they were the primary target of the entire Japanese Navy. They knew they were being hunted. In October 1942, during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, the hunters finally found their prey. The Japanese launched a massive, coordinated airstrike that was terrifying in its intensity. This wasn't just a clinical military engagement. It was a brawl. The Hornet's gunners filled the sky with lead, but the Japanese pilots were determined. They weren't just dropping bombs. Some were crashing their planes into the ship on purpose, a precursor to the kamikaze tactics that would define the later years of the war. A 500-pound bomb smashed through the flight deck, exploding deep in the ship's guts. 2 torpedoes ripped into her side, flooding the engine rooms and knocking out all electrical power. The great ship groaned and came to a halt, a dead weight in the water. Then, a Japanese Val dive bomber, already damaged by gunfire, intentionally steered into the Hornet's smokestack, spreading burning gasoline across the deck. Minutes later, another plane crashed into the front of the ship. The Hornet was on fire, tilting heavily to one side and completely defenseless. The order was finally given to abandon ship, but this is where the story of the Hornet takes a turn from the tragic to the surreal. The U.S. Navy could not risk the ship falling into enemy hands or being towed away as a trophy. She had to be sent to the bottom. American destroyers were ordered to scuttle her, to sink their own friend. They fired 16 torpedoes at her. In an embarrassing display of technical failure, most of the American torpedoes were massacred. Some exploded prematurely, and others simply dived into the deep without going off. The Hornet just sat there, burning and battered, but refusing to sink. Frustrated, the American ships moved closer and fired over 400 5-inch shells into her hull. The ship was glowing red from the heat of the fires, riddled with holes like a sieve, yet she remained afloat. It was as if the ship was refusing to be sunk by her own side, a final act of defiance from a vessel that had already given everything. Eventually, the American destroyers had to flee because the Japanese surface fleet was closing in. When the Japanese destroyers arrived, they found a burning monster. They considered trying to capture her, but the Hornet was too far gone. They fired 4 of their powerful long-lance torpedoes into her hull. Finally, late at night, the ship gave up. She rolled over, the air escaping her compartments in a final metallic groan, and began her long fall to the bottom of the Pacific. She fell for over 3 miles, nearly 17,500 feet, into the absolute darkness of the abyss. This brings us back to the modern discovery. Usually, when a massive steel structure falls that far, the pressure and the impact with the seabed tear it apart. But when the research team aboard the RV Petrel found her in 2019, they were stunned. The Hornet had landed perfectly upright and almost entirely intact. It was as if the ocean itself had caught her and laid her gently on the sand. History books give you dates, maps, and casualty figures, but they can never give you the sensory reality of the event. They don't give you the smell of burning oil, the taste of salt in a dry throat, or the deafening screech of metal tearing under pressure. To understand that, you need a witness. For 77 years, the Hornet was a ghost, a legend sitting in total darkness. Most experts believed she would never be found. But the Vulcan research team, funded by the late Paul Allen, didn't care about the odds. When they confirmed they had found the Hornet, they tracked down one of the few remaining survivors, Richard Nowatzki. Back in 1942, Richard was just an 18-year-old kid, a gunner's mate, who had survived the nightmare brawl of Santa Cruz. When the researchers found him, he was 95 years old, his hair white, but his mind sharp. They sat him down in front of a high-definition screen and showed him the first images of his ship in nearly 8 decades. It was a profound moment. Most people would have been overwhelmed by grief, but Richard looked closely at the screen, his eyes scanning the rusted metal. He pointed at a specific anti-aircraft gun and quietly said, "That was my station." He described the heat of the barrels and the vibration of the deck beneath his boots. The memories didn't come back as hazy dreams. They came back in high definition. But then, he did something that shocked the researchers. He cracked a joke. He told them that if they could send their robotic drone into his old locker, there was $40 in there they could have. Why is the deep ocean better at preserving our history than we are on the surface? Is it possible there are more zombie ships waiting for us? Let me know your thoughts. Like and subscribe.